Ratio basics. Think of ratios as shares. Now, I tend to think of ratios as an example. We can think of when you make a drink of, say, orange squash, and you might use the squash to water to make yourself an orange drink. So perhaps for every 2 parts of orange squash, you dilute that with 5 parts water. What that means is, for every 2 parts of orange squash, you are using 2.5 times the amount of water. So if we were using 10 parts of orange squash, perhaps we were making a jug of orange squash. We could think, well, we know that we need 2.5 times the amount of water. So 2.5 times 10 is 25. Or we can think of it as, what have I multiplied 2 by to get 10? That's times 5. So I do the same to the other side. I'm using 5 times as much orange squash, so I need 5 times as much water, which gives us 25. If we're asked to simplify ratios, perhaps we've got our amount of money is being shared. One person gets £40 and the other person gets £60. And we want to simplify this as much as possible. Yes, we could keep dividing by 2, but really what we want to do is look for any highest common factors. We can see they both end in a 0, so we can divide them both by 10, which gives us a 4:6 ratio, which we can then divide by 2 to give a 2:3 ratio. So yes, we can divide our ratios down, and whatever you're doing to one side, you're also doing to the other. When we're doing more complicated ratio questions later on, it's always important to remember that you're typically going to be given a simplified ratio, which can be multiplied up as well. So let's have a go at another simplify. If we've got 150 to 300, divide both by 10, that's 15 to 30. They're both in the 5 times table. They're also multiples of 15, so divide by 15, that's a 1:2 ratio. And that's as simplified as we can go. Sometimes you're asked to simplify a ratio in the form of 1 to n, where n is an integer, a whole number or value that you need to find out, or n could be a decimal number you need to find out. But your job is to work out what n is. So the aim here is to look, what have we simplified our ratio down by? What have I had to divide 12 by to get 1? 12 divided by 12 is 1. So whatever you're doing to one side in a ratio, you also have to do to the other. So that's 15 divided by 12, which is 1.25. So this is a 1 to 1.25 ratio. Sharing amounts into a given ratio. So let's imagine we have got £120 and Anne and Bob are sharing this money in the ratio of 2 to 3. And how much does Anne get? How much does Bob get? Visualize this. Okay, so Anne gets 2 shares and Bob gets 3 shares. Each of those shares is equal, but they just get a different amount of those shares. So that's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal shares that £120 needs to be shared into. Which is to say that every one of our shares is equal to £24. Anne gets 2 lots of those shares, so that's 24 times 2. So Anne gets £48, and Bob gets 3 of those shares. So Bob gets 24 multiplied by 3, which is 72. And the good thing with the sharing is that you can always check your answer. 72 plus 48 equals 120. Let's look at another example. We've got a piece of string that's 153 centimetres long, and we are going to cut that piece of string into 3 different lengths in the ratio 4 to 2 to 3. So that's 4 parts to 2 parts to 3 parts. So how many equal shares is that? 9 equal shares. 153 divided by 9 gives us 17. So every 1 share in our ratio is 17 centimetres. So that's 4 times 17, 2 times 17 and 3 times 17 to work out the length of those sections. Again, we can check 68 plus 34 plus 51 all add to 153 centimetres. Ratios into fractions. Let's imagine the ratio of boys to girls at a school is 4 to 6. What fraction are boys? Again, let's use our visualising method. For every 4 boys, there are 6 girls. So, almost like what fraction of that shape is the boys? That's total of 4 boys out of a total of 10 parts. So 4 out of 10. 4/10 are boys, therefore 6/10 are girls. Sometimes we have to go from words to write something as a ratio. For example, let's say in a school there are 120 boys and there's a total of 280 students. What's the ratio of boys to girls? So there are 120 boys. There are 280 students in total. So read it carefully. Take away 120 boys, leaving you with 160 girls. So that's 120 to 160. Now it's a case of simplifying, which simplifies to 3 to 4. Some other common questions involving ratio that you've got to read very carefully. Let's say Anne, Bob and Chris share some money in the ratio 2 to 3 to 7. Chris gets £45 more than Anne. How much money do they share? So we have to read this carefully. Anne has 2 parts, Chris has 7 parts. So Chris, in our ratio sense, has 5 parts more than Anne. So if Anne has 2 parts, Bob has 3 parts, Chris has 7 parts. So what we can see is that Chris has 5 more shares. So those 5 shares are equal to £45. Our aim with ratio is to work out what every one share is. So that's 45 divided by 5, which is 9. So every one share is £9. So how many equal shares were there? 7 plus 3 plus 2. That's a total of 12 equal shares, each at £9. So we do 12 times 9, that's £108.